Introduction. You asked for it, and it's finally here. This is the long-awaited sequel to Part 2, and what we're about to uncover goes even deeper. Forgotten machines, forgotten breakthroughs, and inventions too strange to remember. Is humanity on the brink of something too powerful to control? We're about to find out. Get comfortable and let's get started. The Hutchison Effect. In the dim glow of a cluttered laboratory in Vancouver, Canada, something began to stir in defiance of physics. Metal objects vibrated violently. A heavy steel ball lifted itself into the air, hovering with eerie stillness. A chunk of wood fused inexplicably with a block of metal. The room was filled with static, a strange electric hum that seemed to emanate not from a single source, but from the very air itself. This was no science fiction scene. It was, according to eyewitnesses and shaky handheld footage, the real-life result of what would come to be called the Hutchison Effect, a series of alleged phenomena discovered by amateur researcher John Hutchison in the late 1970s. The effect, if it is real, should not exist. It violates the known laws of inertia, gravity, and electromagnetism. And yet, it has persisted in the margins of science, conspiracy, and curiosity for decades, stubbornly unverified, yet never fully dismissed. Hutchison claimed that by combining multiple electromagnetic sources, including Tesla coils, Van de Graaff generators, and radio frequency transmitters, he was able to open a kind of window through the constraints of Newtonian mechanics. In this window, objects would levitate, materials would melt without heat, and matter would sometimes disappear entirely. These weren't optical illusions or chemical tricks, he insisted. They were the visible fingerprints of untapped forces, anti-gravity, zero-point energy, or perhaps something stranger still. The alleged experiments were filmed, albeit with low-quality cameras and often under uncontrolled conditions. Skeptics were quick to dismiss them as hoaxes, misinterpretations, or wishful thinking. But there were engineers, physicists, and military observers who took notice. According to Hutchison, officials from NASA, the U.S. Army, and even Lockheed Martin visited his lab. Some took samples. Some took notes. Others, he says, took his equipment. Then, without warning, the funding offers dried up. His equipment mysteriously disappeared, stolen or confiscated, depending on who tells the story. Hutchison himself faded from public view, resurfacing occasionally on the fringe circuit, still insisting that the effect was real, that it had been achieved, and that someone somewhere had taken it further. But what is the Hutchison Effect, if not a series of parlor tricks? According to Hutchison, it's not just one phenomenon but a collection of anomalies, all arising from chaotic electromagnetic interactions. Objects levitate not because of repelling fields, but because gravity itself is nullified. Materials fuse because their molecular boundaries are broken down by resonant frequencies. In some cases, he claimed to have observed time distortions, clocks running backwards, digital devices freezing as though caught between ticks of the second hand. Mainstream science could not replicate his results. Laboratory attempts, even by reputable institutions, failed to produce anything close to the dramatic demonstrations seen in Hutchison's tapes. The lack of peer-reviewed evidence doomed the effect to the realm of pseudoscience, and Hutchison was cast as a modern-day alchemist, eccentric, imaginative, and ultimately untrustworthy. But there's a darker whisper that lingers around his story, that his discoveries were not failures of science, but victims of suppression. Those who believe in the Hutchison Effect argue that it poses a direct threat to the world's energy and weapons industries. If gravity could be manipulated, who would need rockets? If metals could fuse without heat, who would control the future of manufacturing? If matter could be made to vanish, then what boundary of property, safety, or sovereignty would remain? In that light, the effect was never a fringe curiosity. It was an existential threat. And like many threats, it was quietly neutralized. Some point to the disappearance of equipment, to sealed military documents, or to sudden visits by unnamed officials as signs that something truly significant was uncovered in Hutchison's lab. Others believe the videos were simply clever hoaxes. Wires, magnets, and camera tricks dressed up as breakthroughs. But perhaps the most unsettling possibility is the one few dare to voice. That Hutchison stumbled onto something real, but so chaotic and uncontrollable that even its discoverer could never understand it fully. A science not merely unrecognized, but fundamentally unknowable. A glimpse, however brief, into the hidden seams of the universe, where matter softens, gravity blinks, and the very structure of reality hums at frequencies we were never meant to hear. Today, Hutchison lives a quieter life. His early fame faded into internet myth. The videos still circulate, grainy, dreamlike, disturbing in their ambiguity. The scientific community scoffs, and yet, the footage remains, the stories persist, and in the dark corners of classified programs and private labs, one cannot help but wonder, has the effect truly been debunked, or has it simply been buried? Because sometimes the most forbidden inventions aren't erased because they failed. They're erased because they worked. Karl Schappeller device. In the quiet Austrian town of Linz, in the early decades of the 20th century, a man with no formal education began to speak about forces no one could see, and energy that flowed not from combustion or coils, but from the very fabric of space itself. His name was Karl Schappeller, and his claims would ripple far beyond the modest rooms where he drew diagrams of strange spheres, radiant auras, and mechanisms unlike anything the world had seen. He was no physicist. In fact, by trade, Schappeller was a civil servant and an estate caretaker. But what he lacked in credentials, he made up for in boldness. He announced that he had discovered the key to unlocking primary energy, an energy not derived from fuel or sun or motion, but from the ether, the ancient, long-dismissed idea that space itself was filled with an invisible medium, a kind of cosmic sea. His invention, which he referred to as the Schappeller device, was designed to tap into this ether and produce endless power. Free, clean, and without resistance. To many, it sounded like a fantasy. But to those who saw his blueprints and heard his explanations, engineers, military officials, and even political figures, there was something oddly compelling in his vision. The core of the device was a spherical energy emitter, said to be constructed of barium-strontium ceramics and surrounded by an electromagnetic field. At its heart was a peculiar configuration. A cold, motionless core surrounded by a rotating magnetic field, a kind of energetic vacuum. According to Schappeller, this configuration caused the surrounding ether to condense, creating a concentration of force so pure that it could be redirected as mechanical energy, heat, or even levitation. It was a power system unlike any other, not combustion, not electricity, not magnetism. Something older, something primordial. He called it Raumkraft, space power. Schappeller went further. He claimed that the human body itself radiated similar energy, that consciousness could interface with this etheric field, and that once properly understood, the device could transmit energy across vast distances with no wires, no loss, perhaps even through dimensions unknown to modern physics. Word spread. By the 1930s, elements within the German military and intelligence services began to take notice. According to fragmented records and later reports, Schappeller was approached by representatives of the emerging Nazi regime, who saw in his theories a potential strategic advantage. There were whispers that his work was integrated, or at least referenced, by groups like the Vril Society and Die Glock, secretive research collectives operating in the shadows of wartime science. But Schappeller himself never produced a working model, at least not one that survived the war. His lab was reportedly dismantled. His notes were seized, and the trail of his device fades into silence not long after. What remains is a swirl of speculation. Some believe his device was a pseudoscientific delusion, a byproduct of mystical nationalism and fringe metaphysics. Others argue that the concepts he introduced, tapping into zero-point energy, magnetic vortices, and non-thermal radiation, were simply too far ahead of their time, concepts only now being flirted with in the outer edges of quantum research. But it's the overlap between his device and modern classified technologies that keeps his legacy alive. His theories of energy as vibration, of space as a latent energetic reservoir, mirror oddly with modern explorations in quantum vacuum fluctuation, scalar waves, and torsion fields, terms that remain speculative, yes, but not entirely dismissed. There are also those who point to reports of post-war Nazi scientists working on advanced propulsion systems during Operation Paperclip, where Germany's brightest minds were folded into American defense projects. Did Schapeller's ideas, however embryonic, survive through them? If his device truly worked, even for a moment, it would have rendered nearly every energy system on Earth obsolete. Oil, coal, nuclear, even solar irrelevant. The implications would stretch not just across industries, but across civilizations. Free energy means power beyond governments, and such power is never allowed to remain free. So perhaps that is why Schappeller's invention never saw daylight. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. Because it offered the keys to something vast and destabilizing. Not just new technology, but a new cosmology. Karl Schappeller died in 1947, his name fading from the public mind. His notes, when they surface, are often dismissed as the ramblings of an inspired but untrained man. Yet in some hidden labs, tucked deep behind security clearances and layers of bureaucracy, it's not hard to imagine that elements of his work live on. In devices that hum quietly, unseen, drawing from a space we still barely understand. In the end, the most haunting thing about Schappeller's device isn't that it vanished. It's that someone might still be using it, and we'd never know. Thomas Henry Moray's radiant energy device. It began with a signal not from space, but from the fabric of space itself. In the 1920s and 30s, a young electrical engineer named Tomas Henry Moray, working out of a small laboratory in Salt Lake City, claimed to have tapped into a source of energy unlike anything the world had seen. Came from no generator, no battery, no moving parts. It simply existed, all around us, waiting to be drawn in. He called it radiant energy. Moray described it not as solar power, nor as ambient radio waves, but as a type of cosmic energy, constantly present, pulsating, vibrating, flowing through the universe in ways traditional science had yet to grasp. He said it had no mass, no inertia, and could pass through walls, steel, and even lead. It was not generated, it was extracted. A reservoir of unseen power, hiding in plain sight. His invention, the Moray Radiant Energy Device, was said to be able to draw this energy down from the ether using a specialized antenna and a system of vacuum tubes and semiconductors. No fuel was required. No sound. Just a strange electric hum, and an output that could power household appliances, lights, even heating units. Moray demonstrated the device on multiple occasions, powering lamps, motors, and heaters, all from a sealed black box that had no apparent source of input. He invited scientists, engineers, and even skeptical university professors to witness it. Many left convinced that something real, something revolutionary had taken place. But the demonstrations always ended the same way, with fascination and fear. To understand why, one must understand the time. The early 20th century was an era of rising corporate control over energy, dominated by oil, coal, and the emerging infrastructure of centralized electricity. A device like Moray's, capable of drawing free, limitless power from the air, would have been not just disruptive, but apocalyptic to the existing order. According to Moray, attempts were made to purchase his invention, not to develop it, but to bury it. He refused. He believed the energy should be free to the world, a gift of nature, not a tool for profit. That's when things began to unravel. His lab was broken into, equipment destroyed. His notes were stolen. One of his assistants, a man named Bailey, reportedly attempted to extort him, demanding he turn over the plans or suffer the consequences. When Moray refused, Bailey allegedly attacked him with a gun, attempting to destroy the device and force a confession of fraud. The device never reappeared in its full form again. What followed were years of ridicule, suppression, and slow erasure. The mainstream scientific community dismissed his work as delusion or pseudoscience. His attempts to patent the device were rejected, not because it didn't work, but because the principles behind it defied known physics. In other words, the patent office couldn't categorize what they refused to understand. Still, fragments of his research survived. Diagrams, partial schematics, vague mentions in old journals. They describe components that modern engineers have struggled to replicate. Vacuum tubes with unusual materials, semiconductors tuned to cosmic frequencies, and antenna designs that resemble no known technology. Moray claimed his device worked by rectifying and converting radiant waves, not traditional electromagnetism, but something more subtle, more primal. He said this energy came in impulses, and that only very specific circuits could capture and stabilize them. Attempts to rebuild the device failed. Perhaps because the materials used were no longer available, or perhaps because Moray himself never revealed every detail. There are those who believe the US government eventually acquired his device. That elements of his work were classified, folded into secret energy programs, and suppressed not because they failed, but because they threatened to liberate energy from control. Others point to the eerie parallels between Moray's theories and modern concepts like zero-point energy, vacuum fluctuation, and even quantum field harvesting, ideas once considered fringe but now explored at the outer edge of theoretical physics. To this day, no one has publicly recreated Moray's device in full. But stories persist of quiet research efforts, obscure patents, and basement inventors who claim to have caught brief glimpses of the effect. Devices that light up without wires, circuits that warm with no current. And always, just as mysteriously as they appear, these efforts vanish. Tomas Moray died in 1974. In his final years, he expressed deep regret, not for inventing the device but for trying to share it. He believed the world was not ready, that free energy was too dangerous in a world built on control, profit, and scarcity, that mankind, when offered a gift of light, would rather burn it than be changed by it. Whether the radiant energy device was a real breakthrough or an unsolved anomaly, one truth remains. Something extraordinary passed through Moray's hands, and like so many forbidden inventions, it was swallowed by time. Not because it couldn't work, but because it dared to. Otis Carr's OTC X-1 anti-gravity craft. In the shadows of the 1950s, while the world's attention was focused on atomic weapons, Sputnik, and the Cold War, one man claimed to have already built the future, and it wasn't just a machine. It was a revolution in physics, perception, and power. His name was Otis T. Carr, and he swore that gravity was no longer a barrier. Carr wasn't a scientist in the traditional sense. He wasn't part of NASA, nor did he operate out of a prestigious university. But he was a close disciple of Nikola Tesla, or at least claimed to be, and like Tesla, he spoke of limitless energy, invisible forces, and human potential far beyond the accepted boundaries. His invention, the OTC X-1, a fully functional anti-gravity craft. A saucer-shaped vehicle allegedly capable of traveling not just through space, but through time and dimensions, using principles he described as neutron electricity and space-time harmonics. The craft was said to be powered by a rotating energy system, twin counter-rotating metal disks, spinning around a central axis that created a kind of vortex or electromagnetic field capable of manipulating inertia. Carr referred to it as a fourth-dimensional transport, one that converted electrical energy into levitational force, bypassing gravity entirely. He wasn't shy about it. In fact, he made bold public statements that the OTC X-1 could take humans to the moon and back without rockets or fuel, that it ran on free energy drawing directly from the ether as Tesla once theorized, that it operated silently, cleanly, and with unprecedented speed. In 1957, Carr founded OTC Enterprises in Baltimore and began offering stock in his company. He even recruited engineers and machinists to help construct a full-scale prototype of the craft. A launch date was set. A press demonstration was promised. The world, it seemed, was about to witness the arrival of a technology decades ahead of its time. But then everything unraveled. Just days before the public demonstration of the OTC X-1, Carr was arrested. Charged with selling unregistered securities, he was accused of fraud and misleading investors. His workshop was shut down. His materials confiscated. The craft was never shown again. The timing was suspicious. No technical expert ever testified that Carr's machine didn't work. In fact, no analysis of the device was ever made public at all. What was scrutinized instead was paperwork, not physics. The legal case never debated the science. Only the structure of his business. Carr maintained his innocence until the end. He insisted that the charges were fabricated, designed to silence his discovery. That powerful interests, energy companies, military agencies, and government contractors could not allow a functional anti-gravity craft to be revealed to the public. Because what would happen if gravity itself could be controlled? What would happen if energy could be pulled from space? Rockets, fuel, satellites, all rendered obsolete in an instant. Borders would become meaningless. Transportation would be instantaneous. The very concept of scarcity would collapse. That kind of power doesn't go unnoticed. And it certainly doesn't go unchallenged. According to some researchers, Carr's designs mirrored aspects of classified propulsion research happening around the same time, including Project Winterhaven and alleged experiments at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The spinning disk, the rotating fields, the metallic geometry, they appear again and again in rumored accounts of recovered alien craft, black-budget aerospace projects, and suppressed breakthroughs. And there's something else, something more strange. Carr spoke of the OTC X1 not just as a machine but as a conscious system, that it required mental synchronization, that human intention itself could interface with the ship's control, that space-time was not merely traversed, but navigated through frequency and thought. The ship, he said, was alive in some subtle electromagnetic way, a union of biology, physics, and geometry. These ideas were dismissed at the time as delusional. But today, similar concepts are being quietly explored in fields like quantum consciousness, resonant field theory, and coherent energy systems, all fringe, all speculative, and yet not impossible. Carr died in 1982. His company dissolved. His craft, if it ever existed, was never recovered. All that remains are grainy photographs, fragments of schematics, and the persistent whisper that he built something that worked, and paid the price for doing so. Was he a fraud? A dreamer? Or a man who cracked the code of gravity and found himself standing on a precipice no one else dared approach? We may never know, because in the world of forbidden inventions, the most dangerous are not the ones that fail, but the ones that almost slipped through. Project Blue Beam. It begins with the sky. A glowing symbol appears above the city. Perhaps a cross, a star, a pulsing geometric shape, then another, then a voice, not through speakers, but seemingly inside your own head. Clear, commanding, familiar. It speaks of unity, salvation, and the arrival of a new world. Across the globe, millions witness the same thing, each in their native language, each receiving the same message. To the world, it seems like divine revelation. But to those who have studied the whispers behind the curtain, it is the signal of something else. Project Blue Beam. This theory, terrifying in its scope, surgical in its ambition, was first popularized by Canadian investigative journalist Serge Monast in the 1990s. He claimed that global elites, using decades of hidden technological advancement, were preparing to launch a psychological operation of such magnitude that it would collapse existing religions, destabilize entire nations, and usher in a one-world government under the banner of a false messiah. At the heart of the operation is technology, not fiction, but real, demonstrated, evolving. Three-dimensional holographic projection systems, capable of rendering massive, high-definition images in the sky. Voice-to-skull transmission technology, tested by military organizations, which can project auditory signals directly into the brain using microwave frequencies. Global satellite arrays in low Earth orbit, capable of covering every inch of the planet with coordinated audiovisual data. Monast laid out the plan in 4 chilling stages. Stage 1. The breakdown of all archaeological and religious understanding. This, he claimed, would be achieved through fake discoveries, ancient artifacts, digital scripts, and holographically generated revelations, designed to discredit existing belief systems and confuse the historical narrative. Stage 2. The Great Celestial Show. Using a global satellite system, enormous holographic projections would appear over every region of Earth, each tailored to the dominant religion of that population. Christ over Christian nations, Buddha over Buddhist ones, Allah, Krishna, or other divine forms elsewhere. These deities would merge into one, forming a universal God, who then explains that all religions have been misunderstood, and that now, a new truth has come. Stage 3. The synthetic telepathic connection. Through advanced electromagnetic frequencies, a global transmission would enter the minds of all people, simulating spiritual contact. It would feel real. It would feel divine. But it would not be. Stage 4. The staged alien invasion or the synthetic second coming. The final act. With humanity confused, disoriented, and in awe, a global threat would be simulated. A false alien invasion, or the return of a messianic figure with unimaginable powers. Nations would surrender sovereignty in exchange for protection. The public would beg for control. A new world order would be born, not through conquest but consent. Impossible? Perhaps. But peel back the curtain, and the pieces begin to reveal themselves. NASA has long explored holographic technology, both for training and simulation. DARPA has researched synthetic telepathy and cognitive warfare tools. The military has openly tested sky projection systems capable of rendering large-scale illusions, from cloaking aircraft to simulating landscapes. And in recent decades, massive leaps in neurolinguistic programming, AI voice modeling, and brain-computer interfacing have brought us closer than ever to being able to simulate not just what we see, but what we feel. As for satellites, we now live in a world where thousands of satellites, from both public and private entities, orbit overhead, capable of coordinated transmission, synchronized timing, and global reach. The infrastructure for a worldwide projection system already exists. Only the intent remains unseen. Critics, of course, dismiss Project Blue Beam as paranoia, a patchwork of misunderstood patents, science fiction, and speculative fear. They point to the lack of concrete evidence, to the absence of leaked documents or insider confessions. And yet, the theory persists. Why? Because in a world saturated with deepfakes, AI-generated voices, and algorithmic manipulation, the boundary between reality and illusion has grown thinner than ever before. We have seen how narratives can be constructed and believed. We have watched real events dismissed as hoaxes and fabrications embraced as truth. The tools required to manufacture belief are no longer futuristic. They are operational, they are invisible, and they are trusted. Monas died under mysterious circumstances in 1996, shortly after publishing his work. Some believe he suffered a heart attack. Others suspect foul play. Regardless, his theories took on a life of their own, spreading through underground forums, whispered in conspiracy circles, referenced by dissidents, and echoed by those who feared a future in which truth itself could be engineered. So what if Blue Beam isn't a plan, but a template? Not a single event, but a model, a technological framework that could be triggered, modified, or adapted at will. A testbed for future global psychological operations. A blueprint for mass perception control. And if it is real, even partially, then the most dangerous thing about Project Blue Beam isn't that it might happen. It's that when it does, we may not recognize it for what it is. Because when the sky opens and speaks, who dares ask where the wires are? SEG, spinning Electro-Gravitics disk. In a quiet laboratory somewhere on the outskirts of Moscow, two Russian physicists, Dr. Eugene Podkoltnov Roschin and Dr. Sergei Godin, began to experiment with motion, magnetism, and the strange residual whispers of gravity itself. What they reported defied every textbook, every law, and every expectation of how the universe is supposed to behave. Their invention would come to be known as the SEG, the spinning Electro-Gravitics disk. At its core, the SEG wasn't just a motor. It was an attempt to manipulate gravity directly using a system of rotating magnetic fields. Inspired in part by earlier, murkier experiments by Western figures like Otis T. Carr and John Searle, the Russian team took the idea further, using mathematical precision, cryogenic superconductors, and powerful neodymium magnets to test whether inertia itself could be influenced by electromagnetic force. The device consisted of a multi-tiered, rotating magnetic disk, designed to spin at extremely high speeds inside a carefully isolated containment field. As it accelerated, the fields began to interact, not just with each other, but seemingly with the very geometry of space. What happened next was unsettling. In published papers, Roschin and Godin claimed that when the device reached specific rotational thresholds, weight began to decrease, not for the device itself but for objects placed above it. Measured with precision equipment, mass was reduced by up to 35%. This wasn't simple magnetic levitation. The effect persisted even with non-magnetic materials. Wood, plastic, water, and there was more. Test subjects reported strange sensations while standing near the machine. Nausea, dizziness, disorientation, and even distortions in time perception. Clocks placed in proximity began to drift, not significantly, but noticeably. Instruments would desynchronize. A local bubble of warped spacetime, it seemed, had been created however briefly, however faintly. The implications were staggering. If verified, this technology didn't just challenge gravity, it rewrote the rules. It suggested that electromagnetic systems could interfere with gravitational fields, that mass was malleable, and that inertia, that most unyielding property of matter, could be altered with the right rotational force. If true, the SEG could become the foundation for propulsion systems without fuel, vehicles that ignored inertia, and devices that could lift silently into the sky, unbound by Newtonian mechanics. But just as quickly as the reports appeared, they vanished. Funding was pulled. Research halted. The laboratory was shut down. No further publications came. Western physicists who attempted to replicate the results either failed or encountered anomalies they could not explain. Some claimed their experiments were interfered with. Others received visits from officials urging them to cease unverified experiments for safety reasons. Roschin and Godin faded into the background. Their findings were never formally retracted, only buried under a pile of scientific disinterest and bureaucratic silence. So what happened? Skeptics argue that the results were measurement errors, that gyroscopic forces, thermal convection, or magnetic interference could have skewed the data, that without independent replication, the SEG is just another entry in the long archive of wishful pseudoscience. But others see a pattern, a now familiar script, anomalous effect, limited publicity, immediate suppression, disappearance. And there are deeper questions. Why were Russian military officials reportedly seen near the lab? Why was there a sudden push to classify electromagnetic propulsion research in the early 2000s? And why do some of the SEG's principles echo what has been whispered in aerospace defense circles for years about craft that fly without sound, that accelerate without g-forces, and that operate not with combustion, but with the silent hum of rotating fields? Some have drawn connections between the SEG and UFO propulsion theories, especially those involving mass cancellation and gravity lensing. The idea that by manipulating the shape of the gravitational field around an object, one could essentially fall forward through space, rather than push against it. Such theories were once dismissed, but now, they're simply classified. If the SEG worked, it would change everything, not just aerospace but energy, transportation, and even weaponry. A ship immune to inertia could turn on a dime, dodge any missile, defy the atmosphere itself. A satellite that didn't need fuel could remain in orbit indefinitely. A vehicle that didn't interact with gravity wouldn't just fly, it would slip between dimensions. And yet, like so many forbidden inventions, the SEG was swallowed by silence. No patents, no mass production, no open source plans, only rumors. Rumors of labs still testing in secret, of experimental craft seen over deserts, coasts, and frozen military installations, of scientists who remember the name Roschin not as a fraud but as a warning that we may already have the tools to break gravity. We're just not allowed to use them. Lakhovsky's multi-wave oscillator. In the quiet hum of the early 20th century, before the world was swallowed by the noise of global wars and the rise of industrial medicine, one man quietly proposed something radical. That the human body was not just flesh and blood, but a resonant system, vibrating in harmony with the electromagnetic symphony of the universe. His name was Georges Lakhovsky, and the device he built would become one of the most mysterious and suppressed healing technologies in modern history, the multi-wave oscillator. Lakhovsky was not a mystic, nor a salesman. He was an engineer, a scientist, a thinker unafraid of drawing connections where others saw only separation. While most medical minds of the time searched for cures through chemicals and scalpels, Lakhovsky looked elsewhere, into the invisible. He believed that every cell in the human body functions like a miniature radio receiver and transmitter, constantly oscillating at specific frequencies. Health, he argued, was the result of these vibrations staying in tune. Disease, on the other hand, occurred when those oscillations were disrupted by trauma, by toxins, by environmental interference. And if disease was a matter of frequency, could it also be cured with frequency? Lakhovsky's answer was yes. He designed a device simple in appearance, but profound in intention. A central tube generating high-frequency electrical pulses, surrounded by concentric circular antennas, metal rings, arranged like ripples on a pond. When activated, the multi-wave oscillator, MWO, emitted a spectrum of electromagnetic waves, radiating across a wide range of frequencies. Unlike other machines that focused on a single wavelength, the MWO cast a net, allowing each cell to absorb only the frequencies it needed to restore its natural vibration. It was a tune-up for the body, not through touch or chemical interaction, but through resonance. And according to early reports, it worked. Lakhovsky tested his device on plants first. Tomatoes, geraniums, beans, all exposed to viruses or radiation, then treated with the oscillator. The untreated plants withered. The treated ones thrived. Encouraged, he moved to animals, then humans, patients with chronic illnesses, cancer, tuberculosis, skin lesions. Many, he claimed, improved dramatically after exposure to the oscillator's field. Word spread. The device was used in clinics across Europe. Some doctors became believers. Others remained skeptics. But even among critics, the results were difficult to ignore. Patients who had not responded to conventional treatments showed signs of recovery. Energy returned. Pain diminished. Tumors shrank. But then, as with so many stories in this archive silence, Lakhovsky traveled to the United States to promote his work, hoping to collaborate with American doctors and universities. But upon arrival, he encountered resistance. Powerful forces in the pharmaceutical and medical industries, just beginning their rise to global dominance, had no interest in a technology that offered non-invasive healing with no drugs, no recurring treatments, and no patents. Hospitals refused to adopt it. Journals refused to publish it. Lakhovsky was struck by a car on a New York street in 1942. Some believe it was an accident. Others whisper it was something else. He died soon after. His devices vanished from clinics. His name was buried beneath decades of industrial progress. Today, most medical students have never heard of the multi-wave oscillator. And yet, in underground circles, biohacker communities, and fringe clinics across the world, replicas of his device are still being built, sometimes using his original schematics recovered from old notebooks and archives. Users report effects ranging from deep relaxation and increased energy to the alleviation of chronic pain and inflammation. But none of these results are officially recognized. None are allowed to be. Why? Because the implications are too vast. If the body can be tuned like an instrument, if disease is a form of energetic dissonance, then everything we think we know about medicine shifts. Pills become irrelevant. Surgeries become rare. Chronic conditions become solvable not through chemical warfare, but through subtle waves of light, sound, and electromagnetic alignment. That is not a change the modern system is prepared to allow. And so, like so many before and after him, Georges Lakhovsky was left in the margins. His oscillator, a simple device with the potential to rewrite medicine, became a relic, a forbidden invention, not because it didn't work, but because it might have. Because sometimes the most dangerous technology is the one that heals without permission. The Dotto Ring. In the golden age of post-war optimism, when televisions glowed with images of a bright and healthy future, a man named Giovanni John Dotto stepped into the public eye with something both extraordinary and quietly terrifying. He claimed to have discovered a machine that could detect illness before symptoms appeared, stimulate cellular regeneration, and possibly even reverse aging. They called it the Dotto Ring, a device that, in time, would vanish just as mysteriously as it appeared. Dotto was not a traditional scientist, an Italian-American inventor with an enigmatic past. He worked out of a modest facility in California during the 1950s. He told journalists and medical researchers that his discovery came from studying biomagnetic fields in living tissue, subtle electromagnetic patterns that, he believed, revealed the health or disease state of every organ, even before physical symptoms emerged. The key to his theory was DNA resonance. Dotto believed that each strand of DNA oscillates at a precise frequency, a kind of biological signature tone. When that frequency was strong and stable, the body was healthy. When it faltered, disease was near. And with the right external stimulus, he believed those frequencies could be measured and corrected. Enter the Dotto Ring, a circular apparatus, about the size of a large chair, designed to surround a seated person. Inside it, a sophisticated coil system that emitted pulsed electromagnetic fields across a spectrum of frequencies. The subject would sit inside the ring for short periods, as little as 15 minutes, during which, according to Dotto, the machine would not only scan for abnormalities, but stimulate cellular repair by resonating with the body's own energetic blueprint. Patients described the experience as calming, warm, almost meditative. Some reported improvements in energy, mood, and even relief from chronic pain. A few claimed even more, that scars faded, tumors shrank, and degenerative illnesses slowed. Dotto's claims drew attention, not just from the press, but from government officials, military scientists, and representatives of major pharmaceutical companies. His technology was mysterious, but it showed promise. And that, perhaps, was the problem. Because almost overnight, the Dotto Ring disappeared. In what many have described as an abrupt and deliberate silencing, Dotto's laboratory was shut down. He was investigated for practicing medicine without a license, though no formal charges were ever filed. His equipment was confiscated. His patents were blocked. And most bizarrely, he vanished from public life. He would later resurface briefly in France, attempting to revive his work under more lenient regulatory environments. But the momentum was gone. The media had moved on, and whatever forces had pushed him into obscurity had done their job well. His original devices were never seen again. What remains today is speculation, fragments of interviews, hand-drawn schematics, testimonies from those who experienced the ring before it was taken. Some researchers believe the Dotto Ring may have functioned similarly to modern PEMF, pulsed electromagnetic field, therapy devices, which are now quietly gaining recognition in fringe and alternative medical circles. Others believe it went further, that it was tapping into biofield science, still too esoteric for mainstream medicine. There's also a darker theory that Dotto's machine wasn't just a diagnostic or therapeutic tool. It was a disruptor. If one device could detect illness before symptoms, it would upend the diagnostic industry. If it could restore cellular function without drugs or surgery, it would undermine entire sectors of pharmaceutical medicine. And perhaps that is why it vanished. Not because it didn't work, but because it might have worked too well. In today's world of medical scans, invasive tests, and synthetic pills, the idea of a non-invasive vibrational healing device sounds like fiction. But the truth is, we are surrounded by frequencies. Our hearts beat to electrical rhythms. Our brains emit waves. Every atom vibrates. Is it really so far-fetched to imagine a machine that could speak the language of our cells? To those who believe, the Dotto Ring is not just a machine, it's a lost opportunity. A glimpse into a future where medicine is quiet, intelligent, and attuned to the body's natural patterns. A future that someone, somewhere, decided we were not yet ready to have. And so the ring was closed. Not with fanfare, but with silence. Coral Castle Leedskalnin's magnetic device. Just off a quiet road in Homestead, Florida, stands a monument that should not exist. Massive coral blocks, some weighing over 30 tons, rise from the ground, carved, balanced, and arranged with impossible precision. Gates swing effortlessly, stars align through narrow stone holes, and towering monoliths rest atop others without visible mortar, machinery, or explanation. The place is called Coral Castle, but it is more than stone. It is a question carved in silence. And at the center of it all was a man, Edward Leedskalnin, a reclusive Latvian immigrant who, working entirely alone and mostly at night, claimed to possess knowledge long forgotten by modern science. When asked how he moved and positioned the multi-ton stones, his answer was always the same: "I understand the laws of weight and leverage. I know the secrets the ancient Egyptians knew." What those secrets were, Leedskalnin never clearly revealed. But he left behind clues, in stone, in words, and in magnetic devices scattered among the remnants of his workshop. He was a small man, barely 5 feet tall and weighing no more than 100 pounds. And yet, witnesses reported seeing him maneuver colossal coral blocks as if they were light. Truck drivers who delivered materials returned to find them already in place. Moved without cranes, without pulleys, without sound. No one ever saw him work. No one ever caught him in the act. Only results remained. And among those results were strange instruments, pieces of rebar wound with copper wire, rotating wheels made from repurposed parts, and a mysterious contraption believed to be his magnetic flywheel, or what some call Leedskalnin's magnetic generator. To most, it looked like junk, the remnants of an eccentric's failed inventions. But others saw something different. A machine designed not to generate electricity in the traditional sense, but to interact with the very structure of matter. Leedskalnin believed in magnetism as the fundamental force of nature. He rejected the standard electrical models of the day, proposing instead that magnetic currents, not electricity, were the invisible lifeblood of the universe. He claimed that these currents flowed through everything, and that polarity, rather than energy consumption, was the key to understanding movement, cohesion, and even life itself. In his self-published booklet Magnetic Current, Leedskalnin detailed experiments that modern physics largely ignores. He spoke of individual magnetic particles, distinct from electrons, that moved in spiraling motions, creating fields that could be harnessed, balanced, and directed. He believed that matter could be influenced not by brute force, but by tuning into these subtle magnetic harmonics. So when he moved 30-ton coral blocks, was he using pulleys and wedges as he claimed? Or was he doing something else, something ancient? Some theorists believe Leedskalnin rediscovered a form of acoustic levitation, similar to techniques allegedly used in Egyptian, Incan, or Tibetan monuments. Others suggest he was utilizing magnetic resonance, aligning the natural frequency of the stones with that of the Earth's geomagnetic field, temporarily reducing their weight or inertia. And still others point to the strange alignment of Coral Castle's layout. The massive telescope stone points precisely at the North Star. Certain blocks align with equinoxes, solstices, and lunar cycles. It is not random. It is coded. It is also worth noting that Leedskalnin was highly secretive. He built walls around his property. He worked at night. He rarely spoke of his methods, and when he did, it was always wrapped in metaphor or misdirection. But in the core of his workshop, amid the rusted tools and ancient pulleys, stood that strange flywheel, a device with magnetic coils and rotating discs that may have channeled more than mere electricity. Could it have been his true tool? Could Leedskalnin have built a magnetic resonance device, capable of weakening gravitational fields, altering mass, or vibrating stone at frequencies that made it almost liquid? To mainstream science, this is heresy. But to those who have walked the paths of Coral Castle, who have felt the stillness of the stones and the precision of their alignment, it feels like something else, a forgotten technology, a whisper from a time when sound, magnetism, and will were enough to move mountains. Leedskalnin died in 1951, taking his secrets with him. He left no apprentices, no blueprints, no patents, only stones and questions. Engineers, physicists, and alternative researchers have studied the site for decades. None have fully explained how it was done. And perhaps that's the point. Because if one man, alone and untrained, could manipulate mass and magnetism so easily, what else is possible that we've forgotten? And more chillingly, who benefits from keeping us from remembering? Russian Tesla Tower. It rises like a relic from an alternate future. A massive steel structure, crowned with a sphere, standing alone in a field outside Moscow. Known as the Russian Tesla Tower, or officially the high-voltage Marx generator facility in Fryazino, it was built in the Soviet era, shrouded in secrecy and silence. But for those who have looked deeper, this was never just a scientific experiment. It was part of something larger, a forbidden pursuit of free energy and wireless power, inspired by the work of one man, Nikola Tesla. And half a world away, in the quiet Swiss village of Linden, a secluded Christian community known as Mathernatha was said to have succeeded where others failed. Inside their compound, hidden from public access, stood the Testatica machine, a mysterious device that, according to those who saw it, could generate continuous electrical power from nothing, without fuel, without wires, without connection to any grid. 2 machines, 2 continents, one idea, that energy is everywhere, and those who know how to speak its language can pull it from the void. The Russian Tesla Tower was not built for television. It has no PR campaign, no branding. It's a tangle of metal, capacitors, and strange symmetry, often mistaken for a weather station or an abandoned monument. In reality, it is a gigantic electrical discharge system, capable of generating lightning-like bursts of up to 150 megawatts, simulating EMPs, and recreating the raw forces of nature. Officially, the tower was meant for testing aircraft resistance to lightning and radiation. But unofficially, some believe it was a Soviet attempt to continue Tesla's dream, the transmission of electrical power through the air, through the Earth itself. Not through wires, but through resonance. Tesla's vision was simple and terrifying. That the Earth itself could act as a conductor. That energy could be sent wirelessly across vast distances, harmonized with the planet's own electromagnetic pulse. He built Wardenclyffe Tower in the US for that very purpose, until it was dismantled, its funding cut, its blueprints confiscated. The Russian tower, many believe, was a resurrection of that vision. A test bed not just for defense, but for energy independence. If a nation could transmit power wirelessly, from a single station to an entire city, then power plants, oil pipelines, and fragile infrastructure would become obsolete. But just like Wardenclyffe, the Russian Tesla Tower never went public. Testing stopped. Research ended. Access was denied. Today it sits in silence, intact, maintained, but unused. Meanwhile, in Switzerland, a small community built something perhaps even more impossible. The Testatica machine looks like a museum artifact, a clear acrylic casing, rotating metal plates, electrostatic components spinning with precision. It's based loosely on the Wimshurst electrostatic generator, a 19th-century curiosity, but Mathernatha's version is entirely self-running. It requires no mechanical input once started. No battery, no outlet. It hums, pulses, it glows. Witnesses, mostly journalists and engineers allowed rare access in the 1970s and 80s, reported that the machine powered light bulbs, heated small appliances, and produced sustained electrical output. But when asked how it worked, the members of the Mathernatha community offered no technical explanation. They called it a gift from God, and refused to patent or commercialize the design. They claimed the machine drew power from a higher-order natural field, something akin to the vacuum energy or ether, once theorized by early physicists and now quietly resurfacing in the language of quantum field theory. Skeptics called it a hoax, but no one ever disproved it, and no one, outside the community, was allowed to open the machine. Then, just as mysteriously as it appeared, the Testatica faded from public view. The community declined interviews. The device was removed from sight. The world moved on, forgetting that somewhere in the Swiss Alps, a box once glowed with silent, impossible power. Two machines, two silences, each surrounded by whispers of a limitless energy source, each vanishing into the fog of secrecy. Were these machines real, or were they symbols, physical expressions of a dream humanity has chased for over a century? The dream that energy, the force that drives all civilization, could be pulled freely from nature without pollution, control, or price. And if it was real, why did both projects end the same way? Some believe the answers are simple. The physics doesn't work. Others suspect the truth is buried beneath deeper motives: geopolitical control, economic disruption, the collapse of centralized energy monopolies. Because a world where energy is wireless and free is a world where power, real power, shifts permanently. Governments lose leverage. Corporations lose profit. The old empires crumble. Perhaps that's why the towers are silent. Why the machines are hidden. Why the lights, once flickering with possibility, have gone dark. Not because they failed, but because they succeeded, and that was the most dangerous outcome of all. Chrono-Chaos Engine. Among all the rumors of lost technologies and forbidden inventions, few are as unsettling, or as quietly persistent, as the one surrounding a device known only as the Chrono-Chaos Engine. It doesn't appear in scientific journals. It was never granted a patent. No footage exists of it in operation. And yet, within certain forgotten circles of experimental physics and classified defense research, the name carries weight. Not because it was ever proven to work, but because of what it was allegedly designed to do: manipulate the flow of time itself. The origins of the Chrono-Chaos Engine are unclear. Some trace it to a Cold War-era Soviet program exploring torsion fields and the geometry of spacetime. Others point to obscure references in U.S. defense spending during the 1990s, small line items linked to temporal field stabilization and nonlinear event timing analysis. But what most versions agree on is this: the engine wasn't a time machine in the traditional sense. It didn't send objects into the past or future. Instead, it altered time's behavior in a localized area, creating temporary distortions, stretches, contractions, or irregular pulses within the space surrounding the machine. It was described as a dense, complex configuration of superconducting coils, layered gyroscopes, and oscillating magnetic fields, all arranged in a rotating toroidal chamber. When activated, it generated a faint pulse, barely audible, but one that reportedly caused clocks nearby to drift out of sync. Some slowed down, others sped up. Chronometers that had been calibrated to the millisecond no longer agreed with each other after even brief exposure. The effects weren't limited to machinery. Personnel assigned to the project began reporting episodes of lost time, disorientation, and memory fragments that didn't align with actual events. One technician described feeling as if he had skipped forward several seconds during a test, like he had blinked and missed something real. Another reported a sensation of reliving the same moment twice, with full awareness both times. At first, these anomalies were chalked up to electromagnetic interference, sensory fatigue, or psychological suggestion. But as the occurrences grew more frequent and measurable, concern deepened. Not because the effect was unreliable, but because it was growing stronger with each iteration. According to an unverified internal report later leaked by a third-party contractor, one test resulted in a field where time passed at nearly double the outside rate for several seconds. A camera placed inside the containment zone recorded footage that, when played back, appeared accelerated, though the timestamps were consistent with normal flow. A nearby pendulum oscillated faster within the field, yet outside observers saw no change. Time in that small volume of space had become fluid. More troubling were the cognitive effects. Personnel exposed to the engine for extended periods reported symptoms consistent with temporal dissonance: insomnia, perceptual lag, memory compression, and in a few cases, profound confusion about the sequencing of events. One physicist began referring to his own memories as nonlinear impressions. Another required psychiatric evaluation after claiming to have seen an event occur before it happened, several times. And then everything stopped. The program was abruptly classified beyond its previous level. The facility housing the engine was sealed. All personnel were reassigned or silenced. Equipment was removed or destroyed. Officially, the project had been terminated due to safety concerns and a lack of reproducible results. But unofficially, there are signs the research continued elsewhere. In the years since, hints of the Chrono-Chaos Engine have surfaced in the margins of experimental science. Patents have been filed and quietly withdrawn, describing systems that manipulate nonlinear temporal fields and rotating asymmetrical gravitomagnetic flux. Some of the same names associated with early time distortion experiments have reappeared in black-budget aerospace programs. Even more curious are the whispered reports of time-slip anomalies near certain experimental facilities. Stories of entire rooms where watches run backward, or staff members who lose hours without realizing it. These claims are dismissed, of course. But behind closed doors, some physicists quietly admit that our understanding of time is still too shallow to dismiss anything completely. The most frightening aspect of the Chrono-Chaos Engine isn't the possibility of time travel. It's the idea that time itself may not be as stable as we think, that with the right technology, it can be bent, compressed, or fragmented at will. Such a tool would have staggering implications. Imagine a command center where time flows slightly faster, allowing decisions to be made before an enemy even reacts. A surveillance drone that records seconds in advance of actual events. A weapon that traps its target in a microloop of repeating time, rendering them effectively inert. This is no longer about physics. It's about control. Control over the one thing that governs everything else: cause and effect. If the sequence of events can be rearranged or destabilized, the foundations of reality begin to crack. That, perhaps, is why the Chrono-Chaos Engine disappeared. Not because it didn't work, but because it did. And because the consequences of understanding it fully might be irreversible. The Kapanadze Generator. In the hills of Georgia, not far from the Black Sea, an inventor named Teriel Kapanadze quietly announced to the world that he had done something that would change everything. Not an app, not a startup, but a device, a small box that could supposedly generate free energy without fuel, without solar panels, without even a conventional power source. He called it a self-running generator, and what it implied was nothing less than revolutionary. What made his claim different from the thousands of failed over-Unity devices and free energy hoaxes was the presence of actual demonstrations. Filmed, witnessed, and never fully explained. In these videos, Kapanadze flips a switch on a device that appears to run indefinitely, powering lamps, televisions, electric fans, while being completely detached from any visible power input. And the man himself, reserved, methodical, with the quiet focus of someone who truly believes what he's built, never flinched under scrutiny. According to Kapanadze, his generator was not a miracle nor a violation of physics, but rather a rediscovery of lost knowledge, something hinted at in the works of Nikola Tesla. He claimed his invention captured ambient energy from the environment. Not from sunlight, not from wind, but from the structure of space itself. He described the Earth as a giant electrical body, surrounded by magnetic fields, atmospheric currents, and electrostatic layers, all of which interact constantly in ways we barely understand. And according to him, the generator merely tuned into this vast natural flow. Like an antenna receiving a signal, the device didn't generate energy, it harvested it. Skeptics immediately dismissed the idea. To mainstream science, energy must come from somewhere measurable, traceable, and consistent with the laws of thermodynamics. A machine running without an external fuel source is, by definition, impossible. The math doesn't add up. The laws don't allow it. And yet, the lights turned on. Over the years, Kapanadze produced several versions of his machine. Some were small and table-mounted, others larger, boxed inside green steel frames. In most demonstrations, he would connect the device to a basic battery only briefly. The battery would give it an initial kick, a tiny excitation current, after which it would continue operating with no further input. In one demonstration, he disconnected the battery entirely. The device kept running. Observers couldn't find hidden wires, no underground power source, and no fuel, but the scientific community refused to engage. No peer-reviewed study was conducted. No independent laboratory verified his claims. Some called him a fraud. Others accused him of using hidden power sources off-camera. But those explanations, while satisfying to the skeptical mind, never addressed how the illusion, if it was one, was done. And perhaps more importantly, they never explained why Kapanadze never attempted to sell his idea to the public or monetize it through conventional means. He claimed he had tried. In interviews, Kapanadze stated that he had received offers, some generous, others aggressive, from people and organizations interested in buying or silencing the technology. At least once, he said, his workshop was broken into. Equipment disappeared. Blueprints were taken. He became more reclusive, more cautious. And that's where the story begins to darken. Because if his claims were false, the narrative would have ended with quiet ridicule, forgotten forums, and one more failed dream. But instead, it became something else, a pattern. Not just around Kapanadze, but around similar inventors. People who, whether by accident or insight, discovered strange interactions between electromagnetic fields, ground resonance, and high-frequency coils. People who spoke of energy as vibration, not fuel. And people who all seemed to vanish, fade away, or fall silent before anything could be proven. Kapanadze's devices were never mass-produced. No patent was successfully registered under his name in Europe or the United States. Diagrams leaked to online forums were vague, often hand-drawn, with missing components and unexplained steps. Attempts to replicate his work resulted in either failure or partial success. Strange sparks, unexplained heat, flickers of voltage, but never stable, sustained power. Some researchers believed the core of the device relied not just on components, but on very precise tuning, resonance not only within the coils, but between the machine and the Earth itself. In other words, it wasn't a generator, it was an energy bridge. What Kapanadze might have discovered, knowingly or not, was a way to access the untapped differential between the Earth's electric field and the surrounding air. Tesla believed this was possible. He wrote of it at length. But he never built a device that did it reliably, at least not one that survived public scrutiny. Kapanadze, perhaps, succeeded where Tesla stopped. But if that's true, why did it go nowhere? The answer, as some suspect, lies not in physics but in economics. A device that draws energy from the environment, needing no wires, no grid, no fuel, no centralized control, would not simply disrupt the market. It would dismantle the system. Entire industries, oil, gas, nuclear, utility, would be rendered obsolete overnight. Governments would lose control over energy distribution. The world order, structured as it is around scarcity, would no longer make sense. And so the simplest solution is often the quietest one. Pretend it never happened. Today, Kapanadze is largely silent. His most recent appearances are years old. The original devices, if they still exist, are locked away in unknown locations. Online forums still buzz with speculation, amateur blueprints, failed replications. But no one has convincingly rebuilt what he showed. It remains an unsolved riddle, a flicker of light in a system designed to keep things dark. And whether the Kapanadze generator was real or not may not matter in the end. What matters is that it asked a dangerous question. What if energy is not something we make, but something we've forgotten how to receive? Joseph Newman's energy machine. In the sweltering heat of the American South, sometime in the late 1970s, a self-taught inventor named Joseph Newman stood in a field beside a massive spinning electromagnetic coil and declared to anyone willing to listen, he had solved the global energy crisis. His invention was simple in appearance, a large, rotating device powered by direct current and wrapped in heavy-gauge copper wiring. But what Newman claimed it could do was anything but simple. According to him, his machine produced more energy than it consumed. It was, in effect, a working over-unity device, one that defied conventional physics, violated the sacred laws of thermodynamics, and, if real, would have rendered fossil fuels, nuclear power, and centralized grids obsolete overnight. He called it the Newman energy machine, and for decades, it would sit at the center of one of the most controversial and quietly suppressed chapters in the history of alternative energy. Joseph Newman was not a physicist. He held no academic degrees, had no formal training in engineering. But he was relentless and brilliant in his own eccentric way. He devoured patent documents, dissected motors, studied electromagnetic field theory obsessively, and eventually developed what he believed to be a unified understanding of energy, a theory he called the energy machine theory. At its core was the claim that electricity and magnetism, as traditionally taught, were being misunderstood. Newman believed that electrons weren't just discrete particles, but vortices of spinning magnetic energy. By configuring coils and magnetic fields in a specific way, he said, one could extract energy from the very atomic structure of matter, not destroying it but aligning with it like tapping into a river that was already flowing. His device worked, in his words, by manipulating the gyroscopic motion of electrons within copper atoms. He wasn't trying to generate energy from nothing. Rather, he claimed to be harnessing energy from the atomic level, converting the mass energy of matter into usable electrical output with near-perfect efficiency. To the public, this sounded like perpetual motion, a fantasy, a fraud. But Newman insisted it wasn't. He demonstrated his machine to reporters, to scientists, to anyone who would watch. He filed for a patent with the United States Patent and Trademark Office, USPTO. He published a book. He testified before Congress. And he did all of it while claiming that vested interests, oil companies, government agencies, academic physicists, were doing everything in their power to shut him down. And then, they did. The Patent Office refused to grant his application, citing violation of the laws of physics. A panel of scientists assembled by the National Bureau of Standards concluded that the machine did not, in fact, output more energy than it consumed. Their report contradicted Newman's own tests, some of which had shown efficiency ratings far exceeding 100%. But Newman believed the testing had been sabotaged. He accused the Bureau of using the wrong components, altering test conditions, and intentionally misrepresenting the results. When his patent was rejected, he sued the U.S. government. He went on television. He performed live demonstrations on air, where his machine powered heavy loads, all, he claimed, off a small battery that should have been exhausted within minutes. In some of those demonstrations, voltmeters and ammeters did appear to show more energy output than input. Light bulbs glowed brightly. Motors ran for hours. Yet skeptics argued that such results could be explained through miscalibrated equipment, electrical phase tricks, or measurement error. But the question remained. If Newman was a fraud, why did his machine continue to attract interest from investors, military observers, and engineers who quietly requested private demonstrations? Some of those engineers, including a few with backgrounds in advanced propulsion, reportedly left convinced that something about the machine was real, even if it wasn't fully understood. What if Newman wasn't violating physics, but revealing a part of it that had been overlooked? His machine became bigger, more refined. At one point, it stood several feet tall, with a massive rotating coil powered by a single 9-volt battery, turning an electromagnetic armature capable of lifting heavy objects and running at full torque for hours. Independent observers said it shouldn't have been possible. Newman continued pushing. He traveled the country. He spoke with anger and desperation, warning that humanity was being denied access to a free and abundant energy source, one that existed inside the very atoms of the copper coil. But no mainstream institution would listen. He died in 2015, penniless, bitter, and largely forgotten. His machine relegated to the shadows of fringe science and online speculation. Today, what remains are old news clips, diagrams, a few surviving prototypes, and a thick air of uncertainty. Was Joseph Newman a charlatan? A misunderstood genius? A victim of systemic suppression? Or was he a man who stumbled too close to something the world wasn't prepared to accept? What his story leaves behind is not just a device, but a warning that even in an age of technology and progress, the gatekeepers of science remain very real, and that ideas which challenge the foundation of how we understand energy, economy, and control are rarely welcomed, no matter how many light bulbs they illuminate. The Cloudbuster of Wilhelm Reich. In the quiet countryside of Rangeley, Maine, during the early 1950s, an aging Austrian psychoanalyst stood in a field, staring up at a clouded sky. Around him, a strange machine bristled with long metallic tubes aimed toward the heavens like the barrels of a silver artillery battery. Hoses trailed from the base of the device into nearby lakes and wells. He wasn't performing a military test. He wasn't a weatherman. His goal was something far stranger. Wilhelm Reich believed he could control the weather. He called his invention the Cloudbuster, and he believed it could manipulate a universal life force he named orgone energy, a force, he claimed, that permeated all living things, the atmosphere, and space itself. To mainstream science, it was delusion, but to Reich, it was the logical culmination of decades of work that had already taken him from the couch of Sigmund Freud to the very fringes of reality. Reich's early career was built on serious foundations. A student of Freud and a rising voice in psychoanalysis, he was respected in European intellectual circles. But over time, his ideas diverged sharply. He believed sexual repression caused not just mental illness but societal decay. He tied libido to cosmic energy. He merged biology with weather systems, psychology with physics. Eventually, he broke entirely with the psychoanalytic establishment. By the time he fled the rise of fascism in Europe and settled in the United States in the late 1930s, he was developing new theories that would eventually cost him his freedom and his legacy. Chief among them was orgone. To Reich, orgone was a real physical energy, the driving force behind weather, biology, and even consciousness. He built orgone accumulators, simple wooden boxes layered with alternating organic and metallic materials, which he claimed could concentrate this energy. Patients would sit inside them for hours. Reich believed these boxes could treat cancer, restore vitality, and rebalance the mind. But the Cloudbuster was different. This was not a passive tool, it was active intervention. The device itself was deceptively simple. It consisted of hollow metal pipes, all connected to grounded cables that extended into large water sources. Water, Reich believed, acted as a natural absorber and conduit for orgone energy. The atmosphere, he said, was full of chaotic energetic potentials, and the Cloudbuster, when aimed at the sky, could redistribute this energy by drawing orgone from one region to another. In practical terms, he believed it could break apart clouds, dissipate storms, or even create rain, depending on how the pipes were positioned and how long the machine operated. He conducted several field tests, some of which were witnessed and documented. According to Reich and his assistants, skies cleared. Rain appeared. In one case, a severe drought reportedly ended within 24 hours of a Cloudbuster deployment. Local farmers, desperate and skeptical, watched as rain fell onto cracked fields. Reich took no payment. He simply claimed it was proof of orgone at work. Skeptics offered alternative explanations: coincidence, confirmation bias, natural weather cycles. But the machine's operators insisted the changes were too rapid, too targeted. Something was happening, and that made people nervous. Reich's work increasingly attracted the attention of federal agencies. The FDA, already concerned about his orgone accumulators, which were now being sold and promoted as medical devices, began building a case against him. They called it pseudoscience, health fraud, even a public danger. In 1954, the government issued an injunction barring Reich from transporting his orgone devices across state lines or promoting them in any form. Reich refused to comply. He believed the injunction was an attack not just on his work, but on truth itself. He saw the government as part of a larger machinery of suppression, determined to keep humanity disconnected from the deeper forces of nature. His refusal to appear in court led to contempt charges. And in 1956, he was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. That same year, under order from the court, federal agents destroyed his equipment, books, and research papers, burning them in incinerators like heretical texts. Scientific journals stayed silent. Colleagues distanced themselves. His name became a cautionary tale. A year later, Wilhelm Reich died in prison of heart failure. He was 60 years old. But the story didn't end there. The Cloudbuster continued to fascinate. In the decades that followed, amateur researchers, weather enthusiasts, and fringe physicists attempted to reconstruct it based on Reich's surviving notes. Some claimed success. Others reported strange effects: unseasonal rainfall, persistent fog, or rapid atmospheric clearing in specific test areas. In 1985, Reich's son, Peter, wrote a book of dreams, recounting his childhood memories of his father and the strange machine that aimed at the clouds. In it, the Cloudbuster becomes more than just a tool. It becomes a symbol of a man's lifelong struggle to understand a world that refused to be tamed. Today, Reich remains a polarizing figure. To most scientists, he's dismissed as a crackpot who veered into pseudoscience. But to a small, stubborn community, he was a visionary, one who may have stumbled across a real, poorly understood force of nature that science was unwilling to confront. If the Cloudbuster truly worked, it challenges one of the deepest assumptions we hold, that we are observers of the weather, not participants. That clouds form and rain falls without conscious influence. But what if that's not entirely true? What if the atmosphere itself is responsive to fields we barely understand? What if the boundary between biology and environment isn't so clear? Reich believed that the emotional state of individuals, their fear, repression, trauma, could disrupt the balance of orgone in the environment, creating illness in the skies as well as the body. To him, healing one meant healing the other. A bold idea, maybe too bold. And in that tension between belief and science, between machine and myth, the Cloudbuster remains, not as a forgotten device, but as a question. A question science still refuses to ask. Ending. Some inventions disappear because they fail. Others vanish because they work a little too well. But the deeper question isn't just what was erased from history. It's why. Were these devices truly dangerous? Or were they simply inconvenient? Were they forgotten? Or intentionally buried? What else might be out there waiting to be rediscovered? And more importantly, what should never have been created in the first place? If you found this journey fascinating, consider supporting the channel by liking the video and leaving a comment. Which invention do you believe was real? Which one chilled you the most? Make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. so you won't miss the next part of the series or any of our deep dives into forgotten science, hidden history, and the mysteries the world tried to erase. And if this video made you think, share it with a friend who's not afraid to question the official story. Until next time, stay curious and stay awake.